Hey Brian, how's it going?
Doing well. How you doing, Jeff?
I'm doing wonderful. So I'm joined by Brian Aggerbach. He's the VP of Professional Services at Cognism, and I believe you focus on what I love this term, customer value realization. Is that an official term that you coined, or walk me through that?
Yeah, it's the term that I use when I hop on and try to make sure that we're helping our customers be successful. Yeah, making sure that they're seeing impact in the data that we're delivering to them, and ultimately meeting on those customer expectations that we talked about in that pre-sale motion.
So I've interacted with ProServe leaders, but every ProServe organization from one company to the next looks a little bit different. Tell me a little bit about your remit and your charter for ProServe at Cognism.
Yeah, so it's actually a bit newer for us. It's not something that we've historically done, but something I've experienced with in the past. So I've been in this role for past 18 months, and I've been building up the ProServe organization around a couple things that I'm sure we'll talk about a little bit later. But I have your traditional ProServe team that's focused on delivery of services. Um, Piece of that is data delivery as a big portion, helping customers be able to receive our data in the many different delivery methods, as well as then the solutions consulting team actually rolls up into me as well, which is a bit unique for our organization. But again, that professional services team is quite junior, but something we're expanding on. So some exciting things and a growing strategy there as well.
So, correct me if I'm wrong, but it sounds like your organization is on both sides of acquisition. The solution consultants are in the pre-sales and possibly also in the expansion conversations that you have with existing customers. But then you also have the service delivery piece. I'm not going to use like the Amazon delivery person as an example, but you're delivering the data, right,
Yeah.
in the right places. So that's going to be post acquisition. Is that correct?
Yeah, that's correct. There is a pre-sale component as well, being a data provider. There's always going to be the need to trial and test, and a lot of it that still does happen through flat files. So the data delivery team does help support some of the pre-sale motion, but it's more transactional and gets more and more strategic on the post-sale side.
Okay, great. So, that's great because so you talk to prospects and customers. I'm curious what the typical challenges you're hearing in those conversations, and are they different between a prospect versus a customer?
Yeah, that's a great question as well. So we have sort of a mix, but it's pretty consistent across the board. But what we've been seeing more and more recently is folks who are looking to sort of level up the ways in which they're leveraging their data. Something that I know you have a lot of experience talking about, Jeff, is the context and gathering contextual information and gathering signals to help power their go-to-market motions and do it more effectively and efficiently. That's been something that we've been hearing a lot from our customers, and obviously on the pre-sale side as well. Um, but really, a lot of our current customers who have been with us for some time, have multiple data providers or use us explicitly. They're thinking about, okay, how do I continue to evolve now that I've adopted a data provider and gotten used to that motion? So they're thinking about what's that next step, and I know AI is a component of that, right? And we've seen a lot of growing momentum around how do we think about AI and how does Cognism help us power AI. But on the pre-sale side, we still have a far amount of folks, or we still have a fair amount of folks who are still new to data providers as a whole, or still new to Cognism, or looking to expand into EMEA. So we're still seeing some of the same challenges that we were solving, 4 years ago when I first joined, when AI was less of a thing and folks weren't thinking about contextual information as much. It's still the same challenges for pre-sale customers as well.
So lately, I've had this kind of maturity curve, right? So we move from hopefully
Hmm.
system of record to system of context to system of action. And your systems are actually a launching point for your decisions. But ground one, you have to crawl, walk, and run. And that comes from, great data. And so, I've always thought of Cognism as a solution provider with high integrity, high quality data. And not only that, it's about the right type of data. So like as a revenue operator, It's not about having every person in every email because quite frankly, I'm just trying to get to authority or decision makers and maybe any influencers in the deal. And so I don't actually need everyone's emails or phone numbers. I just need, that 5% of people that actually make a difference. Um,
Mhm.
okay, so let's talk about data collection, data enrichment. Those are like the bare bones piece, but folks are starting to move towards this orchestration layer, data orchestration. Can you describe, what you're seeing? What is data orchestration? Is it just a bunch of ETL pipelines moving from place to place? Like what does that actually look like?
Yeah, so you're right. It definitely follows a maturity curve. Um, and those who again, and we're seeing this more with our current customer base than necessarily those coming inbound. They're looking to expand um, and get a little bit more advanced into these data orchestration topics. So orchestration, when I think about it, is yeah, it's being able to automate that flow, being able to have some layer that allows you to make sure that you're doing it intelligently, making sure that you're oftentimes leveraging multiple providers because different providers have have different strengths, right? Especially when you start getting into orchestration, folks get that's where we see us playing alongside some of the other competitors in the space more and more often. Um, and it is what you talked about, pipelines moving around, but then also tools that sit on top of it, oftentimes allowing you to configure, and RevOps teams in particular, to configure the ways in which they want to manage that data flow. Rule-based logic um, built into a UI and allows us to essentially plug in, allows them to tap into what exactly pause here. What it allows them to tap into specific. What are the specific things that they're looking to get from us? And it's compliance data, diamond data, where we've been focusing on that quality. Like you talked about, it's not about getting everybody and getting all the information for every person in our total addressable market. It's about getting the right folks. We're helping just make that stream of information way quicker, way more optimal, and ultimately sort of peeling back the layer where reps don't have to do as much research anymore. It's just sort of flowing into the pipeline and into the systems where they now go and they interact with that data without really much understanding of where the data came from. They just focus on actioning it. And that's where we're seeing orchestration kind of move. So we're hooking in via API or through ETL pipelines or through flat files, and sort of allowing it to just flow through into the systems of record or systems of context, like you mentioned.
So there's like a couple of ways to think about data providers. I think there's selling the retail, right? Selling to like a B2B business. They go through UI and they have the APIs accessing the data. Then there's like the wholesale component of the business where you're working through an intermediary of some sort. Um, when you think about data orchestration and that value chain of providers, where does Cognism, spend its time partnering across, that entire value chain, right? Because I was speaking to a couple of providers, and we mentioned it before the call, some other companies that, when they're doing their data normalization and enrichment steps, they're actually calling upon, tools like Cognism to
Mhm.
reconcile some of the missing data points that they have, right? It's a value added service from their vantage point, but at the end of the day, they're actually going to, your database for that diamond data.
Yeah, that's right. And so we're sort of the we are what allows those systems to really function to the level that solve the problems, right, that they're coming in for. The way in which we partner with some of those providers, the folks like Traction Complete. Um, at its core, right, Traction Complete and other orchestration platforms do a lot of great work to help, like you said, normalize, enrich, sort of manage that data flow and ensure its quality and integrity. Um, but we're the backbone of those platforms. So we're more on that wholesale side, more, than but we plug into these systems pretty well. And so we're seeing both sides actually sort of play out as we have folks who are more IT focused who want to integrate Cognism data into their data infrastructure. You can think of things directly like the data warehouse, like Snowflake, or you can see folks coming to us who are looking to plug us into a traction complete, more on that RevOps use case, uh, and allows it to go through that normalization in that way. And so you're seeing, I'm seeing it happen in both ways, but we're definitely seeing more of a growing trend towards actually that centralization of data into that core infrastructure, directly into Snowflake, and then being sort of routed in other through other means into things like the CRM, or where it is that the reps are, or CDPs where reps are living. And that's what we've actually just recently launched, like I call it a soft launch because we haven't made a massive splash about it yet, but it's something that we're starting to get a little bit noisier with. A data as a service offering that actually allows us to better pipe into these different tools. Data orchestration being one of those endpoints, but we've been seeing this growing trend where folks are more and more wanting to just ingest a stream of data, either through API, flat file, webhook, and are interested in just getting the raw stream and then being able to sort of pipe it through however they'd like, and sort of that and remove their reps and their ICs from having a platform that they need to access an additional platform, and actually just using their source of truth as that main way to interface with the data.
That's cool. So when I think about the technology stack, let's just at a high level overview, you have the database, and then you
Mhm.
have the permission controls and users layered on top of it. Then obviously you have the business model for accessing the information that you need, and then the UI at the very front end. What you're talking about is really interesting, a composable architecture, right? Someone of like me who started in revenue operations about 12, 13 years ago, I viewed Salesforce as the system of record, right? But now
Mhm.
you're increasingly seeing, okay, well, there are these new PLG motions. There are companies that need to go down market, they have different subscription-based modeling. Maybe the system of record, in the Salesforce uh, context, may not necessarily be the optimal architecture. Perhaps you need a data warehouse, and then you need pipelines that send the data back and forth, forward and reverse, to get to the right place at the right time. One risk that I see with a decentralized architecture is that the data is not in sync, that you have multiple pots of data and they're not reconciling with one another.
Mhm.
Um, so I think it's very interesting. That's a very interesting, item of resolution for any revenue operations team. What comes included in the data as a service? Like, what are kind of the key pillars that you're targeting?
Yeah. So as a part of that, we're looking to do things a little bit differently, and we're trying to focus ourselves around the flexibility of delivering data at scale to these companies. We're the main core pieces of the delivery are going to be, the actual delivery methods themselves, flat file, API being the two main ways, and we're working on actually building native integrations into some of these core tools that we're seeing growing popularity with. Think Snowflake, Databricks being pretty much the primary two that we're hearing about. Um, and then API as a very common way. Most businesses have sort of become accustomed to plugging in data providers into any sort of automation that they have. And then we're actually, believe it or not, there's a large amount of folks who still prefer to access data via our data delivery team directly. There's still a component of like folks who, because they either have continuous ongoing changes to their ICP, like things like campaigns or events, and they want to sort of pass that work off to a team instead of having to go into the platform themselves. We still have a large portion of our customer base who is interested in that approach to receiving data in that way. Um, so those are the three, and then I mentioned webhooks, which sort of help sort of tie things together. And so we're uh, those are the main cores of the delivery, and then we're packaging that up with a bit of advisory. What I've seen in the time in which I've been in the industry is you commonly will have folks who know they need a lot of data, who are ready to consume a lot to try to hit the numbers that they're forecasting and sort of predicting based on the formulas they put together. But at times those things fall down. At times there's strategic changes in direction. They need a bit of help as to how do they get the most out of a data provider like Cognism. With that, we package some advisory services that helps them sort of one get off the ground as part of that initial implementation, make sure they're successful, make sure they've got a good understanding of what is unique to Cognism, how does it differ from anything that they're used to in the market, how do we establish a shared language when you're accessing Cognism data or utilizing Cognism data, and then carrying that all the way through throughout the duration of the contract. And so, we want to make sure that they feel like we're partnering with them, that we're making sure they're successful. It goes back to my customer value realization statement at the beginning, um, and then that advisory service is also just ensuring that we're partnering with them on how they're achieving success and measuring ROI and making sure that we're partnering with our CS team and our account managers on really delivering on all of that. And I mentioned the flexibility piece of this. We're also packaging in the ability to easily update the data that you're receiving from us. So it's more of like a traditional records under management structure, but we want to add that additional level of flexibility. We want to make sure that folks, as their needs change, as that 250,000 records that they were previously managing are no longer relevant for XYZ reason, they can swap that out and go focus elsewhere without being penalized. And so I think flexibility is the big thing that we're also looking to add to this for customers who need it. And so um, that's the core. That's the core when we think of the delivery components. Um, but I think really, I think it's a little bit unique to some of the credit operating model that most of the businesses or most of the industry is used to. We're sort of flipping that on its head and trying a different approach to make sure that we're focusing on customer success.
It's interesting. I was thinking of your business as a little bit of like Netflix. You have the core folks who are streaming the data via
Mm,
API calls, right? And then you have some folks who are still getting physical DVDs, right? You're actually
yeah.
emailing them. You're actually emailing them some data packets, or maybe direct pipelines into their own data stores, right? But they're not
Yeah.
accessing it through traditional API calls, which I think is
Mhm.
super interesting. Um, Okay. Well, when I think about data, especially nowadays with LLMs, right? LLMs are so interesting because they allow you to go web search, crawl the web, scrape the data, analyze the data, and make and somewhat find some gap fillers that you would not normally find with a third party data provider. I call that vertical data or edge case data. I'm curious how much of that request you're starting to see from customers
Mm,
because I do it myself, right? Like I'll add an LLM step into my enrichment, but when it gets to like dozens of records, I can go check if it's you know decent. But if you're talking about thousands of records, I can only do a sampling, right? And I'm going to have to trust
mhm.
that the probabilistic nature of these LLMs is actually coming up with a decent amount of correct data for me to add into my CRM. So I'm curious how much of that pull you're getting from your customers, and if so, like, are you seeing this kind of like vertical or along the edge, this edge case data brought to your team?
Yeah. It's definitely starting to to come to us more and more. And I think where we're seeing it is on folks trying to expand upon what they've historically been sourcing through their outdated, sourcing means. So like just trying to um, a common one is add domains to a list of companies that I have, right? There's a lot of those sort of use cases that folks are doing just to sort of prop up their own data quality or coverage or fill rates of different data points to try to expand on the ability to match to our database or improve their search results. But what I've been seeing more and more, just because we're on the topic of LLMs, is actually again back to that centralized architecture. That's actually been one of the things that's been growing on more of that like more sophisticated end of the maturity curve. We're seeing different operations folks work more closely with their data strategy uh, departments to start centralizing their data into Snowflake and running like where tools like Snowflake start running LLMs on top of that. Um, and that's where I've been seeing the growing trend of usage of AI is actually trying to make it so that the data is actually being served up with that context, being served up with some more relevance that's interfacing between first party data, third party data, and second party data, right? To give a more holistic view. I've been seeing it start to be used more and more that way, still in that sort of assistive AI, um, at prompt type approach, but with with all of the data sort of at the center there, and being plugged into things like CDPs. That's been the growing trend that I've been seeing more and more, and I think it's going to be interesting to watch that as we get, as assistive becomes agentic, and as agentic becomes orchestrated, and orchestrated becomes autonomous. How does that evolve? And it kind of ties back into your point of system of context, right? Being really where I think CRM is moving. And anyways, I'm sure we could spend a whole podcast just talking about that in and of itself. But that's where I've been seeing the trend start to move is assistive AI starting to be integrated in that way.
And I'll give you a real life example, right? So, I was talking to someone and they're selling a software suite or platform to retailers who are trying to prevent retail crime. And
Mm,
they're selling to these retailers, but you don't really care about the headquarters of the company. You care about the locations of the different stores, right? Because each store has their own security issues. And then another thing is, I was talking to somebody else, and they wanted to know how many rooms were in different hotel properties, and whether the hotels themselves were actually part of a franchisee or part of a regional group. So there's a lot of like interesting nuance, because what that would then tell those specific companies is, okay, here are these profiles of these assets or people. And then it tells them a signal when they actually have a conversation with them, because their specific offering has a higher utility if they meet specific
yeah,
criteria, right? Like they have a majority of their stores in dense urban areas that have previously had issues with organized crime, organized retail crime. That's like one set of scenario. Another one is, hey, our hardware and software works extremely well with property clusters of like 4 hotels or more with this many rooms, right? So that you have kind of these interesting endpoints. And you don't get to know that data until you actually have a phone call with a prospect. But by then, you're just doing a bunch of the drudgery discovery with the prospect. But if you showed up and said, "Hey, I know for a fact that you have these hotel properties, these many rooms," it really, I think, opens the door to say, "Hey, these guys have done their research. They know what they're talking about." So it's really
mhm,
cool. The age of data is actually going into this new place, but I'm just highly concerned that when you open it up to a probabilistic model like an LLM, the percentage of you getting it wrong is not zero,
yeah,
right?
yeah. Yeah, it's going to be interesting, and I don't think we're going anywhere away from human in the loop AI anytime soon. And the level of uh, confidence, quality that needs to be behind that data is going to be paramount. And what's the right amount of context or the right amount of data to be able to feed it to achieve the outcomes versus are we feeding it too much, right? And that whole monitoring behind it, it's going to have to evolve, far from where it is today. But we're starting to see things move more and more that direction, and what you just talked about is actually something that we're doing as part of that DaaS offering, doing more derivative or aggregations of data, being able to give more advanced understanding of company attributes or uh, you know different attributes that would help inform an ML or AI, to get a better understanding of that type of I guess like heuristic data, right? So it's actually a growing thing that we're starting to see, and something that actually is packaged in that DaaS offering as well.
So you talked about first customer value realization, right?
Mhm.
A seller's going to go through a series of steps in their sales process. The customer, tells them exactly what they're looking to accomplish. How do your prospects and customers tend to measure like value? Is it, I want to drive X amount of pipeline increase year over year. I want to accelerate deal cycles. Like what's kind of like the most typical kind of feedback that you get from prospects when you hear about value realization?
It's similar to what we said about a maturity curve, right? At its bare bones, we actually get a surprising amount of folks who are like, I would like your help helping me understand how I should measure this, which is another reason why, we've been focusing on some of those advisory services. But we see it at its basics. It's pipe gen. And then as you get more and more sophisticated, as you have a team that's actioning on this data, it gets more and more outcome related. We see a lot of call to connect, a lot of assisted pipe generated. We see a lot of complexity around how do you then well, there's complexity around how do you then attribute that Cognism impact to throughout the sales process as it continues to move on, right? There's only so much that we can attribute, but as you're sort of injecting signals into the mix, we've seen that need to like how do we attribute our own influence sort of expand. So as we're adding things like a new individual has joined this company at a decision, that's they're going to be part of the buying group or part of the buying panel, right? Those types of signals are now allowing us to sort of attribute further value into how it is that we played a role in those deals, right? When it was just, we're providing SDRs with a whole bunch of data. They're going to pick up the phone. They're going to call these numbers. It was pretty simplistic. It was usually just that basic pipe gen. But now we're seeing it sort of evolve as we're getting more and more data that's getting more and more ingrained into the process and sort of injecting at different points of the sale as opposed to just that upfront pipe gen. And so it's sort of evolved as the data's evolved is the answer. At its bare bones, it's just that pipe gen. And then as we get more and more sophisticated, we do look at things like deal velocity, how we're speeding up the deal. And then with these more advanced use cases around data as a service, it gets even more conflated where, again, we're having to help advise them on how to build audit trails and how to again attribute us to what that final result of their system of truth is. How do we play into the multiple vendors they have there? It gets to be a rather complex conversation and actually a really interesting one depending on the use case of the customer. But at its core, it's pretty basic.
That's awesome.
It's outcome
So
based.
I love to build what's called a master data management strategy and thinking
Hmm.
through, what are the key data points that we need for different decisions, right? So different contexts, right? You could have a CSM, you could have a product manager, you could have a seller, all wanting to know different things about this specific customer. They may digest the information in different places, but when there's crossover, then I run into potential conflict, right? So then I have to come up with an ability to come up with a canonical definition for each of those different data points. And then you have to start building out the infrastructure. Okay, what happens when you have clashing data points? What are the tie-breaking rules? What happens to the data that gets truncated? Does that get stored somewhere else? And so, it's a little tactical, but at the end of the day, it serves a purpose,
Hmm.
which is everyone can have the data that they need. It's all agreed
Hmm.
upon rules with the appropriate infra behind the scenes. Um,
Hmm.
so I'm curious to hear from you. Where do you think DaaS, data as a service, is ultimately going for your key personas, and maybe you can talk about your key personas that you typically interact with as well.
Yeah. Um, So for DaaS in particular, it is roughly those there's different entry points as I'm sure you can imagine, right? There's our entry points that we've historically had, which are our sales and marketing folks, where we start uncovering, we start discovering, we start uncovering that this is a larger problem. It's more at its core, as we sometimes call it internally, it's before the CRM, right? As they're looking to solve these problems, it's not just what their reps have. That may be how they previously interfaced with us, but when we start peeling it back, we're realizing it's actually more infrastructural. Um, so we either start there or we start at the IT side, right? They've got a master data management strategy. There's been a lot of growing, or at least from my conversations, there's been a lot of growing pressure by CEOs and executives to start thinking about, okay, how do we build AI on top of this? How do we centralize? And so that's the other portion of this is as they're sort of expanding on their master data management, as they're thinking about who are the providers out there that are third-party providers that we want to integrate to make sure we've got, again, that strength of our different key strategic areas sort of buttoned up by third-party data, we oftentimes will fall right into those conversations. And that's usually a combination of a couple operations teams and we're talking to folks that are on the data team, chief data officers, heads of governance, heads of compliance, um, for a whole host of reasons, either to help them with that centralization or actually to help them tackle with some of those compliance challenges that we're known for within the market as well. So sort of a couple different entry points, and ultimately they end us in the same place, which is data's going in more at the infrastructure level and then being dished out to the end users, but just in a different fashion than what we've historically seen. To the point where they don't even know where the data is coming from. They just are actioning with the data. And so, data as a service in general, I think, we're just getting started with it. I think what we're really looking to do is focus on how can we help customers in our core area, which is EMEA. How can we help folks get better and better at leveraging EMEA data, understanding how to expand into the EMEA market, how to make sure that they're successful in those markets, taking into account the compliance gotchas for that come with the EMEA market as well, with each country sort of having their own version of how you have to interface with the data, and it's still and then still just continuing to evolve the platforms that we have, building more and more point solutions for different personas that we've historically worked with, like RevOps and marketing. So, I think DaaS is one component of the overall product strategy, but DaaS plays sort of that core behind the suite, if you will, making sure that the data is going into the central architecture and being dished out from there.
Well, Brian, I always ask this of all my guests towards the end of the show. Like, what's one piece of advice that you'd like to leave for the go-to-market community?
Yeah, that's a good question. I think I think it's I've been thinking a lot about this AI industrial revolution. I'm sure you can tell from the conversation today. I think it's going to be a very intriguing ride. I think a little bumpy at times. It's going to shake things up over the long term. I think data needs to become a core part of the way in which we think about it. I know it's been something we've all used before, but the level of understanding of, I guess, for lack of a better word, like scrutiny and visibility, or an observability that we're putting on top of the data needs to be expanded, because it's going to be that core piece of our go-to-market motion more and more and more. It's going to rely less on I think it's going to rely less on the traditional things that we've known from our go-to-market and become more about how do you understand the context at the right time, like we've started to see over the last 2 years. I think it's just going to continue to move in that direction. So I guess the piece of advice, if I'm summarizing it, is sort of buckle up and get ready for what I think is going to be a pretty monumental shift in this coming 5 years. Very data centric as well.
So, for the folks who want to connect with you and learn more about Cognism, where can they go ahead and do so?
Yeah, you can find me on LinkedIn. It's probably the easiest. I have my information on there as well. Otherwise, and if you want to learn more about Cognism, we're also on LinkedIn, or you can go to cognism.com.
Amazing. Thanks, Brian. Appreciate you.
All right. Thanks, Jeff.